Hello and welcome to the Freddie Mac Connect Road to Appraisal Modernization session. Audience members are in listen-only mode. This session is being recorded and will be available following the conference. To submit a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If you experience any technical issues, please use the Q&A box and someone will assist you. Lastly, you will find icons at the bottom of your screen with links to the speaker bios and the presentation deck. With that, I will turn it over to Single Family Chief Appraiser and Director of Property Valuation, Scott Reuter. Scott, the floor is yours.
Hello, and thank you, Kathleen. My name is Scott Reuter. I have the pleasure of introducing and welcoming everyone to Freddie Connect 2022 and our session, The Road to Appraisal Modernization. We couldn't be more excited, and honestly, we can just dive right in. I have two guests with me today. We have Danny Wiley, our Senior Director of Single Family Valuation here at Freddie Mac. And I'm going to firstly hand it over to our guest, Keenan Chen with Clear Capital, for a quick introduction. Keenan?
Well, thanks so much, Scott, and really happy to be a part of this panel. My name is Keenan Chen. I'm the Executive Vice President of Corporate Strategy at Clear Capital, and really my role is about looking at the next 3 to 5 years and where the industry's headed and ensuring that we bring all of our capabilities to bear to help the industry modernize and streamline the appraisal process. And in this context, I think also so important to that is building good strategic relationships, and really excited to support Freddie Mac in this endeavor.
Hear, hear. Well stated. And it's that collaboration that is the very basis for great modernization and innovation. Kind of already introduced myself, Scott Reuter. I'm the Single Family Chief Appraiser and Director of Valuation here at Freddie Mac. We collaborate across our group with a variety of teams, including and up to our Senior Director, Danny Wiley. Danny, you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Thanks, Scott. Great to be here. Happy to be with everybody today, but especially with Keenan and Scott. As Scott said, I'm Senior Director of Single Family Property Valuation here at Freddie Mac. I've been a real estate appraiser for a very long time, since the early 80s. And my role at Freddie Mac is basically, I'm the business driver for most things collateral, with a very big emphasis on what we're doing in modernization of our collateral evaluation. So really glad you could be here with us today. Let's talk about, our theme was our trip. So we have a roadmap for our trip today. We've already begun our trip, and Scott's going to talk next about some construction that's underway, the UAD Informs Redesign Initiative. I'll come back and chat with you about some of our appraisal modernization tactics and strategies. And then we'll hear from our passenger. And then finally, we'll wrap it up and take some of your questions and answers. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Scott to talk about the Uniform Appraisal Dataset Project.
Thank you, Danny. I think the UAD, the Uniform Appraisal Dataset effort, is one of the more significant foundational pieces that's underway right now. It's a collaboration between Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to update the UAD, retire the existing appraisal forms, and redesign the entire URAR. It's a multi-year effort, and I think once we come out the other side of this entire project, the good news is we're not creating another static form for the industry to kind of have to react to. It's a complete update of the data set and data standard that appraisers will utilize. So rather than having more than a dozen appraisal report forms, there will be a single data set used to produce appraisal reports. We think this is significant for a variety of reasons. Not only was an update needed, but it will provide the industry, you'll see on the right there, a standardized set of discrete data elements. And I think part of the broader thought is that appraisers can begin to tell the story of an appraisal more in discrete data rather than free-form text. Sometimes the narrative is a little hard to follow, and it's kind of problematic in terms of keeping a nice flow. And for the report, we're designing it so the sales grid will actually be dynamic and specific to the subject property. Right now, one of the limitations with a static form is that every report or property type has to go on one report form. Once an appraiser begins to dynamically interact with the data set, we're being told by our technology and software providers, the appraiser will actually begin through a series of questions to create and design this unique form and output specific to the subject property, up to and including a summary page, along with providing areas where the appraiser still can comment on specific elements in an appraisal. But again, the overarching theme is that there will be more standardized discrete data elements that they'll be able to interact with. On the next slide, we have a public-facing timeline that we're sharing with the industry. When we first got into this effort, I said many times I couldn't believe it was going to be many years. And having a front row seat, we've got project teams, Fannie, Freddie, oversight by FHFA, our regulator. There's a MISMO team. There's so many industry points of connection across many stakeholders that I've now come all the way around and wonder how we're going to get it done in this many years. But we're about midway through this graph. Is a long way to say we're publishing the updated UAD spec to the industry, and there will be multiple continued points of connection and technology lift needed, not to mention the education training that we're going to need to disseminate out to the appraisers. We're going to continue testing, end-to-end testing through the end of 23 into 24, and we anticipate that in 2024, we may likely see limited production on the new UAD. And I think a quick question while we have Keenan on the line. You know, Keenan, Danny, and I get out at a lot of industry events, and I'm fond of talking about how we're migrating towards a more data-driven process and how excited I am. But I think when I look at this timeline, again, I kind of double back at the impact and the time and effort involved. How are you and like your teams looking at the ordering process, the review process, and what that might mean and look like under a new UAD?
Yeah, Scott, that's a great question, because I'm just as excited about increasing data quality and better standardization there. But there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us when it comes to looking at the entire ecosystem of appraisal management, from the loan origination system to appraisal order management platforms, appraisal management companies, all the way through to the appraiser and form software. Our industry very much expects static forms, expects the form types to really line up to the product that's being ordered, and the property type is all really static in our industry. So I think now is the right time, especially while we have more capacity in the market. Now is the time to start investing in modernizing your stack of technology, and really thinking about more dynamic data models and data handling to prepare for this.
No, that's outstanding. Thank you. And it's again, it's good to hear firsthand from you that this is directionally a great move, and again, sort of underscores all the work that's underway. Danny, I think we'll turn it to you for a little bit of a journey through the modernization spectrum and an update on many elements that we have under consideration and have recently launched.
Thanks, Scott. So we have a slide here labeled Appraisal Modernization Tactics, and I can't look at this slide and not think about a conversation Keenan and I had not long ago, where he just asked me point blank, well, what is appraisal modernization and what does that mean? And the appraiser and me looked back at him and said, well, I can tell you what it doesn't mean. One of the things that we constantly hear is that we're trying to eliminate the appraiser and all these. We're trying to go full automation and just eliminate the human appraiser. And I think if you listen to the conversation that Scott just had and Keenan's reaction, if that was really one of our goals, I don't think we'd be spending so much time and effort updating the uniform appraisal data set, right? There'd be no need to do that if we were trying to eliminate appraisals altogether. So what are we trying to do? We're really trying to broaden the spectrum of programs and services that are used to evaluate collateral, and then match the right program with the right scenario. And I'm real happy to say Scott and I have actually been discussing appraisal modernization and alternatives to the traditional appraisal for many years. This is my been here just over 3 years now at Freddie Mac, but Scott and I have actually been discussing this for well over 5 years. What can we do to increase the spectrum of services available? And just in the span of a year, we've seen great progress on this, which is really exciting to me because it seems like we talked about this for over a decade, and now we're finally starting to see that. If we were to wind the clock back just 1 year, there were really only 2 collateral offerings that were out there broadly for everybody to use. We had the appraisal waiver and we had the traditional appraisal. And now, present day, there are 4 broad offerings for Freddie Mac and with more to come. And so let's just take a second and look at, so this is the graph of that spectrum. Again, we have ACE, our appraisal waiver, where we use our models to evaluate both condition risk and value risk. And we get so comfortable that we go, we're good. We don't need the appraisal at this point. Then the next circle to the right there is our ACE plus PDR. This is a new offering that we just rolled out in the middle of this year. And it sort of fills some of that gap in between the appraisal waiver and the traditional appraisal. ACE plus PDR, we use that for, right now, we're using it for certain loans that we deem to be a little higher risk. And so to mitigate some of that risk, we will offer the appraisal waiver if we get a property data report that confirms that there's no adverse conditions present at the property. So this is not, it's a trained inspector who goes out to visit the property. Just as we have a data set for our appraisal reports, we have an appraisal or a data set for our PDR reports. The information is collected in accordance with that data set and then submitted in for the lender to review and for us to consider. And again, as long as there's no adverse conditions, we grant the waiver with the property data report, but stopping short of requiring an appraisal of any kind at that point. There are a few exceptions where the property data report might lead us to say, well, now we've got a different scenario, we need an upgrade. So if the property was adjacent to a large commercial facility or subject to some other major external obsolescence, for example, we would need to upgrade that. So what we have introduced then in this space for ACE plus PDR, there is the potential to upgrade that to the hybrid appraisal. And what that would mean in this case is that that property data report that's already been done could be then supplied to a real estate appraiser who could take that data and perform an appraisal report based on that data, which we call the hybrid because the appraiser is relying solely on an inspection done by a third party. But then they could still create the appraisal report that looks very much like the traditional appraisal report, but we didn't have the appraiser go personally inspect the property at that point. For now, the hybrid appraisal, our use of the hybrid appraisal is limited to this ACE plus PDR upgrade, but we are in testing for broader use of the hybrid appraisal, and it's our hope that we will adopt broader use of that hybrid appraisal across a much broader spectrum sometime next year. The other thing that we've introduced broadly very recently this year is the desktop appraisal. And Scott and I often sort of joke when COVID hit, there were a lot of really negative things that came out of COVID. But one of the positive things that came out of COVID was that it gave us a lot of data to test the desktop appraisal. I think you guys are all be aware that when COVID hit, there was a large reluctance for people to go visit properties. In some locations, it wasn't just reluctance, it was illegal to do so. So there were some severe restrictions on what appraisers could do with regard to inspecting properties. And so we, in partnership with Fannie Mae and FHFA rolled out the COVID flexibility for the desktop appraisal. And one of the things that did was give us a lot of data to analyze. So we've looked at those desktop appraisal reports that come in. We've analyzed how complete they were, how credible the values were, things like that. And so it wasn't a formal test and learn as we normally do with things, but it did give us enough data to make the decision that we would adopt the desktop appraisal broadly into the guide, as we did back in March. And then, of course, we have our old standby, the traditional appraisal, the appraisal where the appraiser schedules an inspection time, go visits the property themselves, and then completes the appraisal after that. But I would say even in that space, we are seeing the emergence of technologies that can really help the appraiser in completing the traditional appraisal as well. I think Keenan will talk about one of their technologies, Kubicasa, and how the scanning of the home with the telephone or with the mobile device can allow that appraiser to prepare the floor plan and the living area calculations and the sketch far more efficiently than manually measuring the home as has been done for years. This next slide really just says in a graphic format the details that I've just covered. Again, sort of delineating what ACE is, ACE plus PDR, the hybrid appraisal, which again is very limited use at this point. The hybrid's only available in the situation for ACE plus PDR upgrade. And also, of course, the desktop appraisal and the traditional appraisal. We want to return for a second to the desktop appraisal, which we did roll out in March, and to some challenges, right? Anytime you introduce something new, particularly to groups like appraisers, we've been doing things pretty much the same way for a very long time. And so to introduce some of the new requirements that went with desktop appraisal, overall, the appraisers have done a good job reacting to that, but there certainly were some challenges. And so I want to return the podium back over to Scott, who's going to talk about some of the challenges we saw and maybe give you some pointers when you look at those desktop appraisal reports, some pointers that will help you make sure that they are compliant and have all the things in them that they need to have. So, Scott.
Awesome, Danny. Thank you. So, yeah, and to Danny's point, when appraisers get worried, to his one comment about appraisal modernization feeling like appraiser elimination, really, there's nothing more from the truth. In that slide where he had the stylized bubbles, 4 of those 5 can and do involve an appraiser. The ACE PDR can, and the hybrid desktop and traditional do. What we're trying to do is introduce ways to bring more efficiency, leverage this tremendous the emerging tools and technology to bring more efficiency, maybe by bifurcating parts or componentizing parts of the process. And one is the desktop offering. So the desktop was introduced this year. We look at it as a big step on the modernization spectrum. To Danny's point, we're all appraisers at heart, at least on our team here. And there were some additional requirements that are required with the desktop. And we wanted to just kind of remind you the messaging that we're sharing with the industry, particularly during the fall conference season here, about the desktop, adoption of the desktop, and things appraisers need to be aware of. And the top of that list is that Freddie and Fannie collaborated on a new form. So, while we're still in the forms environment, we wanted to make certain that, at least from a practical standpoint, when an appraiser receives a desktop order, they're pulling up and completing it on the correct form. So it's the 1004 desktop or the 70D for desktop. That's important because as you may compare that to a regular 1004 Form 70, they look identical. I think they're virtually identical, other than a couple of key elements which are very significant, and that's in the scope of work, certifications, and limited condition that actually reinforce what the appraiser has done, limited to information they've received. Quickly, there's a floor plan requirement. That seems to be the one that's getting a lot of industry reaction. Some markets, it's common to have a floor plan available. We're learning many markets it's not, so that's becoming a requirement to complete the report that I know is getting a lot of focus. There's a suite of photos that are required. We're reminding appraisers that they are certainly not relieved from their competency or their geocompetency requirement for USPEP. That's a way to say appraisers need to be competent and aware and understand the markets they appraise in. If you're in the state of California, Florida, Texas, Ohio, these are big states. That doesn't mean because you have a credential that you can sit at your home office and do desktop appraisal statewide. So in addition to the suite of photos, we do permit comp photos where permitted. The appraisers, Danny mentioned what we learned during COVID, and I couldn't agree more. For as horrible as COVID was, it prompted and drove a few things across the line. One was the biggest test and learn I think ever on desktop appraisals. During the pandemic, there was some relaxation of some of the development. We're reinforcing now appraisers must verify all information that they utilize, so they can't assume. It's a bit tricky. It's not impossible, but it's a bit of a nuance when they're not going in these properties, how they're going to do that. They can, when they're consuming a floor plan, a sketch, calculations, and a suite of photos, and if they feel like they have the minimum information to complete the report, it's still incumbent on the appraiser to do some level of cross-compare photos, looking at that floor plan, maybe pulling an auditor's or county card, pulling up an old listing. There's a variety of things the appraisers can and need to and should be doing, and they need to tell the reader of the report, in fact, what that was. And we're just telling appraisers that are feeling pressure from some folks that are ordering these that we're counseling them. If you don't have all the information to complete the report, then do not complete a desktop. You're welcome to upgrade to the full traditional appraisal at that point and complete that assignment. With all the chatter on floor plans on the right inset in that little computer screen, it was not our intent. I never want to speak for Fannie, but I don't think it was our friends at Fannie Mae's intent either that the appraisers now go source a floor plan. If the one exists, that's fine. I do know, and maybe even Keenan can talk to, they're supporting some strategies where folks are trying to provide that for the appraiser. That's perfectly fine, but we're reinforcing the fact that's not yet another piece of information the appraiser needs to source. They have to complete these based on all the information they have. And it's funny, we pull a lot of these reports. This third bullet came from my friend, Mr. Wiley. We talk about the underlying requirements to do a desktop appraisal, or just if you have all the information, not necessarily based on the complexity of the report. We had a property somewhere up in Wisconsin or Michigan, and it had a couple outbuildings, it had an ADU, and our review team picked it up, and we thought, okay, here we go. This was done on a desktop, and this is more than likely shouldn't have been on a desktop. Well, guess what? They had everything handed up to and including a floor plan on the ADU. This appraiser really did their job, and they had all the information. So that's a long way to say it's really based on the information, and underscore the fact you've got all the information to do the report. The last thing we've been mentioning out is just appraisers love to pull up a template and clone an old report. And we saw many, many times where the appraiser did that in some level of haste and pulled in comments like utilities on at the time of the inspection, when in fact they never went to the property. It's a desktop, and that never really happened. This is a slide just to show a couple of the examples of compliant, non-compliant examples relative to the floor plan. We, with all the emphasis on floor plans, sometimes that's all we got, which was on the right. On the left, we require a floor plan, sketch showing dimensions, and the GLA calculations, which you see inset below. We can take all those in a variety of ways, and up to and including an appraiser, including hand calculations for the GLA. Again, we were really emphasizing, particularly to our appraiser audience and our appraiser friends, they need to have all the information and really just take their time to ensure they're going to manufacture and deliver a credible and compliant appraisal. Danny?
Thanks, Scott. That was a great overview of some of the challenges and some of the success stories we've seen with the desktop as well. Overall, as you know, that program, I would say it's worked out really well. We've not seen any increase in risk, and we've seen when we get the reports in, the biggest challenge has been sort of on the administrative side. For the traditional appraisal, the appraiser software typically does the GLA calculations automatically, and that's happened for so long. I mean, that happened for me 30 years ago when I was in the field, and it's happened so long automatically that I think that's probably why that's such a common omission. So now we'd like to hear from our passenger, right? We're on this journey, and we have these passengers that we bring along with us. And so we have Keenan with us here today, who's going to talk about all this appraisal modernization efforts, or all these modernization efforts, and how, his take on it and what he sees from where he sits. So Keenan?
Yeah, thanks, Danny. I'm happy to be a passenger. I try not to backseat drive too much. But no, this is, to me, this is an exciting time. Some of the things that we hear from the market is, well, now that we don't have, the record volume that we had in 2021, and appraisal turn times are coming down, why do we still need to focus on modernization? Why is this still important? And one of the things I like to remind folks of is that, if you notice, each one of those products, or each one of those spectrum of options that Danny went through, all of them are designed to drive a different type of digitization of data earlier in the process. One of the main differences here is that whether it's a property data report, a PDR, the requirements of a desktop appraisal for data, or a hybrid process, all of these actually change the way the data is collected and gathered right at the property. They're taking what was really an analog process and moving it more to a digital process where data is captured on site in a digital app, and then that data is now available for all the stakeholders downstream, including the borrower, to see a less subjective, much more objective and accurate approach to rendering the property, and then using that data to conclude value. So, the need to bring things from an analog world into a digital world is a big part of the importance of modernization as we look to increase accuracy and reduce risk for the collateral process. So, but there's also a lot of benefits that come with that. With the ACE plus PDR program specifically, what we've seen is that this gives the ability to communicate differently to the borrower up front when it comes to value certainty. Because you do have that appraisal waiver already in hand, so that you can start to communicate differently to the borrower on their offer in case of a purchase property, or even in a refi situation, to communicate differently to the borrower up front in a way that helps improve that experience. And then, of course, it's faster then to complete the end-to-end process. We've seen, even in this market, ACE plus PDR solution be 3 days faster on average than an appraisal, and we've seen most of them come in shorter than 3 days. So just imagine what that can kind of do to the entire process, when you can have certainty around when you're going to conclude your appraisal process. When it comes to increased underwriting efficiency, again, we've seen a reduction of costs, with cost cutting being a huge focus right now, throughout our customers. We've seen an increase in efficiency when it comes to underwriting. The PDR report has data in a standardized way, not in narrative content, but in actual fields that you can automate off of. You can bring into your QC processes and move it through the funnel much faster. And then I think with this modern inspection experience, the idea of someone coming to the home and capturing the home as it is in a digital format, utilizing mobile technology. Danny mentioned, Cubicasa as one example of, capturing the whole home and then getting an output of accurate understanding of square footage, accurate understanding of the flow of the property, the characteristics of the property. All of that to me leads to an improved borrower experience, which we've seen resulted in fewer customer escalations per file. We've actually seen 50% fewer customer escalations on the appraisal, because less of those concerns around, hey, they didn't capture the gross living area accurately, or I made this addition, or this breezeway was captured in one way by the last appraisal I have, but now it's being looked at differently. All of that gets more standardized and then results in fewer customer escalations. Lastly, kind of what we've seen, and we've done over 240,000 modern type appraisals on GSE loans over the past couple of years. So we've kind of seen a lot of this. But one of the things we've seen is that there is good adoption from appraisers. There actually is nationwide coverage available so that you can roll out these products with confidence. We have over 5,000 appraisers that have raised their hand and participated in trying out non-traditional appraisals. So, a lot of progress has been made, and it's the right time to kind of keep pushing forward.
Thank you to our presenters for such an informative session. We will now be taking questions. If you have a question, please submit it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. If your question does not get answered during the session, someone will follow up with you after the conference. We've already had some questions come in, so with that, let's get to the first one. First question is, can you share any challenges or success stories regarding technology and the adoption of new programs or technology? Keenan, do you want to take this one?
Sure, yeah, I'd be happy to. I think some of the most common challenges, or at least concerns that we get is, first of all, the technology itself. As Danny mentioned earlier, moving from two collateral products where you had just kind of a binary choice between an appraisal waiver and a traditional appraisal to now four options means you really need to rethink your workflow and your ordering capabilities to know, based on the eligibility that you get on the loan, what path should I go down, and then also rethinking your workforce that's actually going to fulfill these products. Now available to you as non-appraiser workforces, but there's a things to consider there with incorporating them in. Some of the other challenges, or maybe things we get as concerns, is how do you educate, right, your sales force, your loan officers, the folks working with borrowers on something different. And none of us like change, and it's not just appraisers that don't like change. We know that loan officers don't like change either, and no one wants to try something new that's going to potentially impact their deal. And so there's been questions around is the quality still there? Is the value accuracy still there? And we've been really pleased to see that the same level of quality and accuracy is coming from these products, like from desktop appraisals. When we compare them with traditional appraisals, we've seen less than a percentage difference when it comes to the consistency of values coming in on loans. So those challenges, I think, can be overcome through education, but that education up front, as you're doing your onboarding and rollout of these new products, is absolutely crucial. And then I already mentioned some of the benefits that we've seen in terms of the actual performance of these. Is about faster turn times, more value certainty up front, and then really less customer escalations and noise.
Thanks, Keenan. The next question that we have is, how does Freddie Mac decide what new programs it will adopt? Danny, could you take this one?
Sure. I think, some of our partners out there are very familiar with this because they participate in test and learns with us, but some probably are not. And I hearken back to years ago when I saw Mr. Reuter up on the dais at a conference one time saying, what we do at Freddie Mac is we're in the risk management business. And so when we try to test or analyze or consider a new product or a new program, we really have four pillars that we look at. First and foremost, how does it affect our collateral risk decision-making process? We're always going to look at that through the lens of how does it compare to the traditional appraisal, because that's the alternative we have, right? So we need to make sure that any new program or product provides us risk decisions that are at least as good, if not better than the traditional appraisal. Second, we want to make sure that it promotes consistent valuation outcomes. There's a lot of emphasis right now on reducing the potential for bias in the evaluation of collateral. And so we want to promote things like that. And we've seen that with some of the things we're testing in the hybrids, for example. We know that PDR data, we get a more consistent condition rating from that process. So we're reducing the sort of noise that potential bias might introduce to the process. Our third pillar is something that Keenan talked about, simplifying the loan manufacturing process. Right? Does it make it easier for everybody involved? And then lastly, does it have the potential to reduce consumer cost? Another bullet that Keenan brought up as well. That's honestly not our first. Our first and foremost concern is the collateral risk decision, but we use all four of these bullets as we evaluate any potential new offering.
Thank you, Danny. I think we have time for one more question. Let's see. Scott, I think this one would actually be great for you. Earlier, Danny gave an example of when ACE plus PDR would need to be upgraded to a hybrid appraisal. Could you give any more examples?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you, Kit. That's a good question. So, bear in mind the PDR is a property data report. It's the first time we're gaining that information to help inform the waiver. But there will be points to Danny's comment, and where that will need to be upgraded to the hybrid. So there are likely site conditions or maybe conditions with the property. So if we learn as a result of that property data report that there are there's a sinkhole, there's erosion, there's any easement or encroachment problem, or the structure's got some significant problems on the exterior, that would be one. Two, the property itself. We may learn that the building status of the property is proposed. It might be below a certain amount of square feet. I think 400 square feet is the measured GLA that is the threshold. If it indicates 0 bedrooms, 0 baths, above grade, there could be examples of some example of external obsolescence. It might be next to a landfill, high power tension lines, industrial site, and that type of thing. So those are the elements, both from a site, external, and even property characteristics that might make it eligible and need to be upgraded to that hybrid appraisal.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for questions today. If we did not get to your question, someone will follow up with you after the conference. Your opinion is important. Please take a few moments to take our brief survey so that we can continue to bring you timely and relevant content. You can also log in at any time after the conference to play back this or any other session. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the conference.